share a little bit about yourself. Maybe some of us, you know, it's a small group, weren't at your last wonderful program you had about abstract photography. So just a few thoughts about what you do.
Yeah, okay. Well, I've been photographing for probably over 30 years at this point. And like most of us, I started off with travel and landscape type photography. But over the years, I've kind of done many other types. I've done weddings, portraits, composites, and of course, abstracts, which I presented to your group last month. It's the first time I've judged for the Camera Club, so I'd like to make a couple of comments about my view of the judging process. In my opinion, the judge's responsibility is to be as objective as possible in evaluating your images. Whether I like a particular image is basically immaterial. The question is always, how does this image compare to other images in the same category or genre? An open competition can be a bit of a challenge because what's important for one type of photograph or genre, the criteria, the importance of a given criteria may differ depending on the genre. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through your images. I think the real value in these Camera Club competitions is about what you learn and not so much about whether you get a prize or take first place. And if you enter other competitions, particularly online competitions like Black and White Magazine or those types of competitions, if you do enter those, you must know that the competition is fierce in those online competitions. And judges are looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of images, very good images. And so how do they pick between so many wonderful images? And a lot of times it comes down to nitpicky details that are hardly noticed by, say, a normal viewer. So some of my comments may sound nitpicky, and that is basically because they are. But if you enter these type of competitions, it's those little nitpicky details that can make a difference between being accepted into a show and also can make the difference in whether or not you win an award. So there's not a huge number of images in the competition, which is kind of nice because that means we have more time to review each image in detail. I am very focused on the images, so if we start to get into a time crunch, Mike, I'm kind of counting on you to sort of nudge me. I sometimes need that little, prick to get us out of the. I don't know what time you guys like to end.
Typically, I mean, it depends on the number of images. Usually about no later than 9:15, between 9 and 9:15, somewhere in there.
I think we should have no problem getting through them then.
Okay.
So I have to admit, it was great to see the pictures in advance. It really gives me a chance to really look at them very carefully, and I really appreciate that aspect. It's the first time that I've had that happen, and I think I'm going to recommend it to other clubs that I judge for.
Very good. And make sure you go ahead, Barbara.
Oh, I was going to say with that, shall we get started?
Sure. Barbara has a website. Make sure you check it out. She's got a lot of material on there. I looked at her schedule, and she's a busy gal, and so she's got a lot going on. And so check out her website. There's a variety of different genres on there, and she's a jack of all trades. It seems just tries everything, see if it works for her, see if she enjoys it. So very good. Check out her website for sure. I was very impressed going through it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We do the silent run through. We'll do mono first, and then we'll do mono first. And then if anyone wants a break, I usually say the judge needs a break or not. We take a break. It's up to them, up to him or her. But let's go ahead and do the silent, no comments, and then we'll go back to the very first mono image, and that's when Barbara will make comments. And again, everybody, please mute your mics during this process. We appreciate it. Here we go. Silent run through for the monochrome. Alrighty, I'm going to go back to the original first image. Okay.
Question for you. Is there a way that I can use my cursor to point out elements in the picture, or is that I'm just going to have to talk my way through it?
No, I had a judge ask about that, and I could not find a way in Zoom to do that.
Okay.
But let me get this. Let me try something here.
Yeah, you have a cursor, so oh, wait a minute. Can I grab your cursor?
No, I don't. I looked into that. I mean, there may be a way, but I can't figure out. Just a minute. I gotta do something here.
All right. Well, maybe you can use your cursor, hopefully, to kind of when you see what I'm talking about. Just a little bit easier with the cursor, but we'll work it this way.
Okay, I'll try to see if they've provided one in Zoom. I cannot find a way to do that. You know, but
be sure to mention the titles, Mike.
Yes. Let me get this. Trying to get this set up right the way it's supposed to be here.
Okay. Are we ready?
Yeah, we're set. Okay, the title of this one is After the Rain at Arch Falls.
Okay. I think this one has a very classic sort of Ansel Adams feel to it. There's some beautiful shapes in here, lines. If you look at kind of how the water falls, it makes a nice, beautiful sort of backward-esque curve. And then the rocks kind of want to go in an opposite direction, starting up in the left-hand corner and then coming down over to the mid-right and then circling around. The detail is beautiful in this. Nice, sharp edge to edge. And the tonality is just wonderful. So I think it's a really great photo, and we will keep it in for further consideration.
All righty. Okay, the next one is Bodhi Lighthouse.
This one, I think one of the first things that really impressed me about this image is just the tonalities are perfect. The whites are super white and the blacks are nice and deep, and the contrast in it just makes this image pop. The composition is very nice. I like the reflections, and sometimes people complain about sort of your horizon being in the center of the image, but in this case, I think it's very appropriate that the horizon is in the center of the image because of the mirror reflection. If I had to nitpick this one, there's a couple of places kind of on the horizon where there are little trees or poles sticking up. Again, if you were to put this into like a black and white competition, that's the kind of thing that might get you kicked out when compared to other fantastic images. So you might want to go in and clone those things out. And there's a little bird over on the left-hand side over top of the little little small building that I would also suggest cloning out. But it's a very beautiful, well done image. We'll keep it in for consideration.
All right. Next one is Danny.
Okay. The thing about silhouettes, and I think that's been done quite well here, is you want a very clean view. And I think in particular, the way the hair is shaped and the arm resting on the head and the hand even is just like really beautifully aligned, so that the silhouette is very beautiful in that area. The other arm is quite nice. The leg that's hanging over the side, the calf is sort of behind the block. And then you have some shadows that kind of right where the foot, the kind of at the ankle, that sort of blocks, you're clearly seeing the line of the foot. So what I might have suggested is, moving that calf in front of the, to the front of the block that she's sitting on. And then just make sure your lighting is such that you're getting a clean line at the foot as well. I was kind of intrigued by how the lighting was done on the leg, so that you can see the outline of the calf against her body. I thought that was a kind of an interesting take. And it took me a minute, but there's also flowers, I guess, that she's holding. I think the one thing that might help that is if you can bring out the hand as well, so that you have the curve of the arm and the hand going up. That adds another nice curve to the image, and also kind of visually makes more sense than seeing the bouquet just sort of floating in space. The other thing I noticed is that you haven't cropped it symmetrically. It's a little asymmetric. That doesn't necessarily bother me, but I'm not exactly sure why you would do that either. You might want to try it both ways and see which way you like it best, with a nice symmetric crop. But I assume you chose this on purpose. And I have mixed feelings about it, I guess. But overall, I think it's a very nice image, and we'll keep it in for consideration as well.
Right. Okay, the next one is titled "Don't Drop the Phone."
The one thing about photojournalism, I think, is somewhat unique in how we judge it. And photojournalists care less about being tack sharp, and it's more about capturing the moment and the expression and the story that's being told. And I think what works very well in that respect in this image is the little girl who's looking over across at the baby. Her hand position is just wonderful. Her expression is very nice, and she's well isolated against the background. I think another kind of strength of this image is sort of the commentary, because all three adults are holding phones, and I think that's quite a nice catch. I do think, though, in general, crispness is not as critical in photojournalism, but the woman holding the baby on the right she's a bit blurry, and I think that detracts from the image. It would be nice to have her a little bit crisper. And then, of course, the man here is cut off at the head, which is unfortunate. So he sort of becomes background noise rather than a player in the picture. And I think a lot of times you're looking for the story, and unfortunately, the woman on the right is sort of, if she were looking toward the mother and the daughter on the other side, I think it would be a more effective image. But these are very hard to do, so I give you credit for giving it a try. I don't need to see this one further.
All right. Okay, the next one is, I have e-ring can. It's a composite.
Yes. No kidding. This is I thought a very well done composite. I like the repetition in the sky, the patterning in the sky, and the patterning in the rain, or the water coming from the water can. Nice texture in the background in the hill. The woman is, I think she stands out nicely because of her costume, which is good. Her pose is a little, I guess, I don't understand the pose, I guess I would say. It looks a little artificial, and I'm not sure what I would suggest instead, but I don't know, maybe if she had an umbrella and her, something that sort of felt more in keeping with being rained on. I did notice, I was curious about the hand, because when I looked at it, I realized I like the shape of it. And the hands are very difficult to photograph and portray in images. But it isn't holding the can where you would normally hold it, kind of on the handle. But I'm actually okay with that, because I think the hand is very easy to interpret the way you've done it, even though it's not necessarily realistic. So overall, I think it's a very good image, and we'll keep it for consideration as well.
Writing. Next one is In a Tangled Web.
This one, I kind of love how beautifully crisp you've got the spider kind of face and his main body and parts of his leg. even up kind of the ones that are sort of distanced from the main area, kind of up in the high, up in the middle and the top of the image. So that's very well captured. I also like I think it's very nice how the threads of the web are kind of moving in a nice kind of gentle curve at the bottom and then also at the top. And it's also almost drawing your eye to outside of the picture, where you can kind of imagine a bug is caught in the web. So I think the kind of the gesture in this image is very well captured. So we will keep it in as well for further consideration.
All righty. Okay, the next one is Into the Safe Zone. It's a composite.
Yes. This one is kind of one of the things that kind of strikes you immediately is the hat. And I think the hat is what really makes this work very well. Because if there's you have this like little narrow door, and of course the pose of the person running in there looks like they're running, which kind of technically doesn't make a lot of sense. But the fact that the hat is there, obviously knocked out as he's running through the door, just adds a sense of humor to the whole thing that makes the whole image work very well. In terms of nitpicking comments, I think you're kind of blocked up here on sort of the upper right. The black area would probably, if you could transition that a little bit better so that there's some texture and detail in the blackest area, that would be something. Again, it's a bit of a nitpicky comment, but if this were put in another kind of competition, that might be what would throw it out. But I think it's a fabulous image, and I love the sense of humor, and the compositing is very well done. So it'll stay in for consideration. I also love the bricks on the walls. I think they're just very nicely done. They're nice and sharp, and the variety and the shading is a part of what makes this very interesting as well.
All right, the next one is Locomotive 630.
I think you have a nice angle here. It's very dynamic. The tonalities are, I think, very well done. The one thing that, again, here's a little nitpick, is over in the right-hand side, the sky is very white, and your eye goes to white. And unfortunately, you really don't want, that's not the area you're most interested in. So I would suggest either cloning in some clouds there or just burning it down so that it's not the brightest area of the picture. But other than that, I think it's a very well done image, and we'll keep it in for consideration.
All righty, very good. The next one is Marathoner.
This one I had to look at for quite a while because I'm kind of missing the context, I guess is what I would say. You obviously have a runner. His hands are in a position where you would think maybe he's crossing the finish line, but you don't see a finish line. And in fact, I presume if this were, perhaps this was shot on a field and somebody's in the bleachers shooting down on sort of a running path or, whatever. But it's sort of, the context is puzzling. And I don't know what I would call this type of image. I think if you look at it as a photojournalistic type image, what's missing is the rest of the story that you would normally see in the background that isn't in this one. The one thing that I did really enjoy about it, though, is when I first looked at it, it looks almost where this hand is positioned. It looks like it's almost, you could imagine him holding a gigantic javelin. And so it has a bit of sense of humor to it that I think is quite attractive. I kind of puzzled over whether or not it was Photoshop, because there's some kind of, like if you look right underneath the arms, where the arms are horizontal, there's some kind of fuzziness or, I don't know, kind of crunchiness, I guess, that I would normally expect or see with a composite, but I don't think it is. I think maybe it's just that this is a very high ISO image, and so you're kind of losing some of the definition that comes with a very high ISO type of image, or maybe a low resolution. So yeah, this is a very interesting and different image, and I can't really figure out how this was shot, but so I give you credit there, because normally I can do that. I think I will, we don't need to see this one further.
All right. Next one, Morning at the Taj.
This one, there's kind of the thing that's fascinating about this is this fog, because it's sort of outside here, and then there you see a little bit on the right-hand side over the top of the wall where the little trees are on the very right-hand side. It's kind of funny. I guess I don't think it's photoshopped in, but it makes for a very interesting picture in terms of just puzzling over what it was actually like the day of. I do like the fact that it was taken during the fog, because the Taj Mahal would be very difficult to get great detail in because it's white, and you've got fabulous detail in all of the areas. It's just really, really nice how much detail you've captured, and it's hard to do at other times of day. So I think this one is very nicely done, and it is. Let's keep it in for further consideration.
All righty. Next one is Passo Arch.
This one has so many things that I really enjoy about it. The first is it has a very nice Gothic kind of feel to it that I think it's hard to capture or create a mood in an image as well as this. And I think it has just a beautiful mood to it. It has some beautiful repetitions in terms of these arches. There's like the three kind of stacked on each other, right, kind of in the middle of the picture. But then there's also the arch that he's walking through. And then there's the arch that is formed by the light. And then, of course, there's the arch of his umbrella. So that repetition is just fabulous. You have other types of repetition that I think is a very nice part of it. These squares that are sort of in the top of the picture, followed by sort of in the very middle toward the bottom, there's another square. And then on the side wall, there's a couple of other little squares. So that quality of repetition running through the image gives it a very nice rhythm. And in fact, the other repetition that I think is very nice is this side wall on the right-hand side forms sort of like a trapezoid going to the top of the image and then down and then to the bottom. There's a vague repetition on the left-hand side where there's a white kind of shadow line coming down and across. I don't know if you can see it, but it'd be great if I could use my cursor to show you. But that repetition is also a very nice element of this. If I had to nitpick it at all, I would say there's this little S thing down here in the lower left that you might decide to clone out, because it's sort of, your eye goes to it, but it doesn't really, I think it's not as essential to the images as the other parts. And there's so much delicious detail in this that you don't need that extra detail. And I love the pose of the guy. You've captured him beautifully. So this one is, we'll keep in for consideration.
Right. The next one, Phoenix Rising.
I think with this one, you've done a very good job in terms of getting sharpness from edge to edge. There is this little, in the lower left, there's this sort of white, I suppose it's maybe a branch that it would be nice to kind of get rid of that, either by cloning it out or cropping it out. I wouldn't crop too much though, because I do like the little branch at the bottom. I think that adds a lot to the image. Beautiful lines and texture throughout this. The one comment I would make is the toning on this is um, pretty obvious, I guess. And I'm not, you might want to try a little more subtlety in the toning, because typically toning, I guess it's a matter of sort of taste more than anything, but I tend to prefer, personally, I like to see toning where the toning isn't the first thing I notice about the image. It's something that I notice as I look at the detail a little bit more. And I think in this case, the toning stands out pretty strongly. But overall, it's a very nicely done image, and we'll keep it in for consideration.
All right. Next one is Rosewall City Hall. Rosewall.
One,
yeah.
Okay. This one I think is the cropping on this is pretty fantastic. If you look in the corners, there's a little black triangle. If you look on the sides, like at the top windows that come down at an angle, they are cropped exactly the same, left to right. The only tiny little one that I can find that is slightly off is the ones that are on the bottom that are angled. The one on the left, the point doesn't go all the way to the wall, but that is the only area I can find where there is any kind of where the symmetry is only slightly off. And so I think it's marvelous that you've been able to do this. It's a really it just shows attention to detail, and for pictures like this, that's actually a real plus. I also love the feel of this, the tonality, the whites. You almost feel like you could be looking up into sort of a, I guess that's a hexagonal shaped enclosure, and you're looking up into the sky, and the sun is almost like, the center part is almost like a sun. So it has a really nice sense to it. And I even like these little, you can see these little white, I guess they probably are lights that are kind of around the edge. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but I think they add something to it as well. It almost gives a sense of celestial sky to that kind of that inner white area. Again, if I had to nitpick, I would say there's a little bit of shadowing here it's in the center. If you go from the center point and go a little right, the rest of that white area is pretty much very smooth, and there's a little bit of shadowing there. You might want to look at sort of softening or lightening that up a little bit so that sort of ethereal feeling is kind of complete in that circular area in the center. So this one is also will stay in for consideration.
All right, the next one is Scattered Memories.
This one, actually, there's a lot of interesting things going on in this one. One of the things that is really fascinating about this abandoned building is the wallpaper. Every wall here basically has some kind of wallpaper, and it's all different. And I think you've captured that very nicely in terms of where you chose to set
It's
your
a composite. It's composite. Sorry, it's obvious, I guess, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, could be maybe you created that, maybe not. I don't know. But if you created the wallpapering, that's a fabulous job. The one thing that I really enjoy about this is the choice of costumes of your ghost, because her costume echoes the wallpaper very, very nicely. And I think that's a very nice touch in this case. I like the fact that you've ghosted her for the most part, so that you can see the wallpaper and the railings behind her. I noticed that you didn't really ghost her face quite as much. And I think I would suggest maybe trying that, because I think the white face almost floats out too much. And I think it might emphasize that ghostly feeling if you also had sort of that transparency in her face as well as the rest of the costume. The one area that I think I struggled with is if you look at the steps and where the pictures are, particularly the steps, there's a a layer of pictures and then the step, and then another layer of pictures and then the step behind it. Those are pretty messed up in terms of, I don't know if you were cloning that or what, but you're losing a sense of reality there. And I think whatever you did, I don't know, isn't working as well as it could. If you look below the main post of the stairway, you can see sort of a square where the edges of the photoshopping are really, or cloning are really obvious. So from my perspective, the pictures are, I think, an interesting concept, but I don't know that you necessarily need them for this image to work. And, if it's some of these images can be very difficult to Photoshop, and if it's beyond what you're kind of can do well, then maybe you don't need to add something like that to make the image work. But if you wanted to try to make this work as is, I would suggest burning in the stairs that are, because they're lighter than a lot of the other areas. So darken them in, darken in the base, kind of at the very, the floor, kind of right in front of the steps, and the floor kind of slightly to the left of the ghost. I would darken all of that down so that it's closer to the kind of what the floor looks like on the right-hand side, because that way you can sort of, it hides it hides photoshopping issues a little bit better, and it takes away attention from those areas and focuses it on the things that are like very well done, such as the ghost and the wallpaper behind it. So this one has a lot of imagination. Execution would help it. Improvement, some more work on the execution would improve it. But I think because it is very creative, I will keep it in for further consideration.
All right. Okay, the next one is Sea Monster.
I think this has a very classic feel to it. I love the sharpness and the level of detail and the texture, not only in the sea monster, but also in the background trees and in the clouds. And I had to look at the river for quite a while, because it, at first I was thinking it was water, but then I realized it's ice. And I think that really adds a lot to the image. The fact that it doesn't appear to be a flowing stream as much as ice. I think that, like I said, it's different, and I think that adds a lot to it. It has a very classic sort of Ansel Adams feel to it, which I think is quite nice. And so we'll keep this one in for further consideration as well.
All righty. Next one is Snowy Egret, Juvenile in Flight.
I think you've captured the bird very nicely. I love the sweep of his wings and that sort of that circular shape that the wings are formed into. I think the legs look very nice, and it's a good, reasonably sharp. The wings are a little soft. There's a little bit of motion there, but I think that's okay. The background is quite nice in general. There's on the right-hand side, there's a lot of black, and I guess there's a couple of trees or something. I would suggest lightening that up, or perhaps cloning a little bit, not cloning 100% over it, but just bringing that up so it's not sort of inky black in that area, and it matches the rest of the background a little bit better. You could also crop off that very bottom light area, because again, your eye tends to go to the light spots, and you really don't want to drag the eye out of down to the bottom of the picture, because of course the bird is what's of interest. So cropping it, I think, could do that, or you could burn it, burn that area in if you preferred. I like the kind of on the left-hand side, there's almost like a ghostly figure, which I think is actually quite interesting as well. So there is a little bit, overall, the exposure is good. You might be running into a little bit of highlights being burned out around the, I guess, the that must be part of the wing or the body of the bird. If you could maybe texture that a little bit, that might add a bit to the picture. And overall, the tonality is very soft. You know, you don't have the full range of blacks and whites, but I think that works in this image because it has a soft kind of feel to it in general, in part because of the background, but also, you know, the bird feels that way to me as well. So we'll keep this one in for further consideration.
Ready? Okay, the next one is, let's see here. I have the birds. It's a plural, but okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Squawk sings a snowy egret. That's what it is. Sorry, got the wrong one. Okay, sorry. Jumped ahead.
Alrighty. I think this one is a nice portrait of a bird. The background's great. You've captured a nice angle on the body itself, and the claws are kind of well photographed so that you can see kind of the whole of the bird itself. I'm not sure what's going on with that beak, but that's kind of fascinating. I don't know if he's eating something or if that's just what they look like when they have their mouths open, but it's a pretty nice capture. This one we'll keep in as well for further consideration.
All righty. And then the next one is the birds.
Here's the birds. Yes, definitely. This one has a very, very much of a Hitchcock feel to it. I think it has a mood to it that's just fabulous. Part of that comes from the toning here. It's toned, but it's subtle toning, and I think that works very well. You have all of your birds are 100% in the frame except for the one on the very right here, and so I would suggest either cloning that out or cropping it out. And you can move the vignette further in, because I think the vignette adds, if you decide to crop it, you could bring the vignette in a little bit more to kind of maintain that moodiness that the vignette helps establish. But yeah, I think the kind of how you've captured the birds are really great. There's a couple, like the one that's sort of in the middle on the very right, that's sort of very classic and as a silhouette, very good. Some of the other ones are a bit more creepy, like the three in the bottom, but I think that adds to that sense of Halloweenish horror that that this picture helps kind of invoke. And so I think it's worked out very well. We'll keep this one in.
All right. Okay, the next one is the door. It is a composite.
Yeah. I really like the creativity and the concept in this. I think in terms of compositing can be very difficult, and you've tried to, you know, I like sort of these lines that you have in the upper part of the walls. I think they work okay. Where it starts to get a little more confusing, I guess, is where the handrails are, because the lines start to flow around the handrails themselves. And I think what I might suggest if you're for a composite like this is if you could isolate the handrails separately as individual parts of the components, and then just make these walls these solid kind of striped lines from top to bottom and shade them the way they are now. But then you could put the handrails over top, and you wouldn't have such you know, so obvious amount of photoshopping going on. It would feel more natural. But again, the concept's very, very interesting. It's kind of unusual in that the walls don't really feel very realistic. You have this white glowy thing in the middle, which I guess is sort of, you know, perpendicular to you, and then the walls that are sort of shaded. But I think you've done a really great job on sort of shading, and I kind of don't mind the way you've designed the walls, because I think it adds to sort of that unreality, kind of mystical kind of feel to it. So I think kind of with just maybe working on the photoshopping a little bit better, would really make this into a fabulous image. You could also, like, you have this nice black line for the walls in the center. If you could try to continue that all the way down to the bottom, I think that would also help. And, you know, at the bottom, you have a lot of blur going on, but I think that works just fine. I'm okay with that. So again, this one is a very creative image, and I tend to give a little extra credit for creativity. So let's keep this one in for further consideration.
Alrighty. And the next one is To the Earth.
This one has a beautiful mood to it. It's very subtle. And again, it has very much of a kind of an Ansel Adams feel to it that I enjoy. I really like how you've highlighted the first stone, or the headstone. And then there's a very subtle kind of, if you go to the right, there's another kind of headstone, I guess. And then you come up to the light here that's in the middle of the right-hand side of the picture. And then you kind of circle around the tree and go back and start over again. And so I think that it just has a very nice feel to it. It's very subtle, but it has a nice charm to it that, I don't know, you feel the power of the gravesite with this image. So we'll keep this one in for further consideration.
Alrighty, and the last one for the mono is Zoo After Dark Composite.
Again, I think this one has a lot of creativity going for it, and the things that I think really work well, I love your walls and sort of this back bar area. The rhinoceros is kind of nicely isolated, and I like kind of the texturing that you've done on the floor, and actually the lighting looks pretty decent on the floor as well. Kind of where you run into a bit of a problem is the straw, or the hay, I guess, that you've photoshopped in. And I have to admit, you've taken on a huge challenge here, because putting this kind of textured detail into a composite is very, very difficult. And what I might suggest is, it looks like you've cloned it in. What you might try instead is, if you have a photograph of a field of grass with maybe a dark woods behind it, so the grass is lighter than the woods, you could import that and then place it around at the bottom of the grass at the bottom of the rhinoceros's feet, and then use a blending mode to try to separate the grass from the woods, so that you don't have to do all this cloning, because this is you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to get a decent clone on this. But that would be the way I would suggest doing it. And what you might have to do is come back to your background and put a layer on it and darken the bottom part where you want the grass to show through. So that would be the approach I would take to maybe addressing some of the difficulties of photoshopping in this situation. But again, the concept's very nice. The one other suggestion I would have is you might move the rhinoceros around a little bit, because his ear is sort of blending into the background. And if you could either lighten him up a little bit or separate the ear from the background, that would give more definition, and there'd be less confusion around the ear part. So again, I think this one shows a lot of imagination, so we'll keep it in for further consideration.
Alrighty, now next we go to the color. So let's do did you need a break, Barbara? Break?
Sip of water while you're doing that.
Okay, sure. All right, we'll do the silent run through. So the first image is this one here. So here we go, silent run through. All right, Barbara, let's start with this one so I don't have to flip back to the first one. So let's just start at the, if you don't mind starting at the very last one. This is the last one, so of that batch. So,
Not
don't
a
mind.
problem.
Okay, great.
I think the overall, the lighting on this portrait is quite nice, and I would call this a portrait. I think the pose is quite nice. The hands are a little awkward looking, but the hands are very difficult to place in portraits. But otherwise, I think it's a beautiful pose. The one thing that I looked at that kind of like puzzled me is I was looking at the chair, and if you look at the seat where not wires, I guess whatever they are, but the seat itself is sharp where she's sitting, and in focus. But if you look at the back of the chair, that's quite out of focus. And so I was kind of puzzled because, you know, you're looking straight on at the chair. So in theory, all the parts of the chair that are closest to you should be in focus. And then the parts that are further away from you should be less in focus. And as a matter of fact, the further kind of on the back, the further part is actually in better focus than the front. And so I was going, how does that happen? And I think what's happening is perhaps the person put a blur on just that front edge of the chair. But it blurs can work, but if you are going to use them, you have to think about sort of what visually makes sense in real life and from the camera's point of view. And I think that's kind of not working very well in this image. It could be that there was junk over here that you were trying to get rid of, because I think you've done a very good job in terms of having a beautiful, clean background in this image. And maybe that was the area where that was a bit problematic. The thing about portraits in general is that I think this was shot as a fairly high ISO because the skin tones are a little bit what I would call scrunchy. I think there's maybe noise in a lot of noise in the skin tones. And I think in general with portraits, you know, the assumption is that you have time to set up your lighting and you're working off a tripod. So in theory, you should be able to shoot this at a lower ISO and get nicer skin tones than what you have here. So I don't think I need to see this one for further consideration.
Right. The next one is The Edge.
Okay. This one, kind of what really struck me kind of almost immediately about this one is if you go in the upper left, you have all of these wonderful triangles going in all directions. There's some pointing to the side, some pointing to the top. There's a kind of a white part of the building that's pointing down. And I think that's just a really wonderful quality to this picture of buildings. And not always something that's easy to capture. A lot of building pictures are much more kind of squared off or rectangular. So I think you've done a great job capturing some beautiful triangles. I also really like kind of in the blue area, kind of to the left a little bit, there are little lights, I assume they're lights, but they're little white points that also form a bit of a triangle if you follow the white lines. And you might actually want to brighten one up or add one to make that triangle a little bit more obvious. But I think that's an also very beautiful part of this image. What I might suggest is, since that's what really is outstanding, you don't necessarily need maybe the lower 25%, or on the right, you could crop it in maybe by a third. And then what you're doing is you're focusing the viewer's eye on all those wonderful triangles that are kind of not as obvious in the areas that I just mentioned that you could crop out. So you might want to take a look at that and decide if you think that's sort of how you would like to go on this. But I think it would put more emphasis on all the wonderful triangles in the image. But I think it's a beautifully done image otherwise, and we'll keep it in for further consideration.
All right, next one is The Catch.
This is one I had to look at for quite a while because it was a bit of a puzzle to me. I think just a comment on the poses first is I really like sort of the pose that you have here. The two arms that are in parallel with the woman's leg. That's a very nice feature, and sort of the curve of her body and the curve of his neck and head around her body are beautiful. I love the expression on his face. In terms of the only kind of quibble I would have with that top part of the picture is where her hand is. Her hand, basically her thumb is coming out of her eye, and that's a very awkward silhouette. So I kind of wish her hand were a little bit more separated from her head, so that it's very, you see very clearly that there's no confusion about what's going on there. But of course, these things are very hard to capture. So I think you've done a great job in general of capturing a beautiful pose. The area that I struggled with was kind of below the man's knees, because there was something about it that just felt very off to me. And as I looked more closely at the picture, I think there was some Photoshop work going on there, because I can kind of, if you look at the calf that's sort of on the perpendicular calf to the floor, the calf itself at the widest part is kind of blurred, but if you follow the line down to the ankle, it's much more it's sharper. So so I'm kind of looking at that, and I'm also looking at the feet, like the toes on that same leg, or it looks like there was some separation that probably was less than perfect. And then the other foot, there's some blurriness at the bottom that kind of implies to me that there was something in the way that you had to Photoshop out. But kind of just in looking at the picture, I thought the top half looked very realistic, but somehow or another, the feet looked like they were floating in the air rather than anchored on the floor. And I think that's maybe because there was something there that was screwing up your picture. And it's a good attempt to try to fix that, but those are very hard to fix, I have to admit. Maybe some different shadowing, but somehow or darkening the area perhaps would help kind of mask the difficulties that you have there. But the lighting's beautiful, and there's a lot of really wonderful qualities in this image. So we'll keep it in for further consideration. I love the background, by the way. The wall behind it is beautiful.
All right, next one. Sunset on the Bay.
I love the ethereal quality of this. The colors are gorgeous, and sort of this, as I was looking at it, I think there might be a little bit of wind going on because the grass on the right-hand side is a little bit blurred. But on the other hand, the horizon is sharp. And if you come down to the lower left, there's a lot of sharp detail in the sandy area. And on the right, there's quite a bit of, excuse me, on the far left, there's also kind of more sharpness than there is kind of in the right part. And to be honest, I really love that kind of soft look that you've gotten with, like I said, I think it might be the wind. And one suggestion I might make is, in this case, because the very far left is very sharp and in focus, and there's a dreamy quality to the right side, they're sort of in conflict with each other mood-wise. And so maybe if you cropped like a third of it off on the left-hand side, and maybe a little bit at the bottom, so that you're not including the gravel. But I would definitely, on the bottom, I would definitely keep the reflection of the grass in the water, because that's absolutely beautiful as well. I think you'd end up with a picture that is more consistent in mood, and I think it's absolutely beautiful in that respect. So we'll keep it in for further consideration.
All righty, the next one is Red Turban.
This is kind of a, 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 a kind of a puzzling image in certain respects, because I usually try to categorize something as a portrait or a photojournalistic image, and this one sort of straddles in between, in the sense that it's taken more in a photojournalistic style, but there's not a lot of context. There's not a story being told in how you've cropped it or framed it. So yeah, it's sort of hard to kind of judge it in that respect. But if I look at it, I would say probably the intent was more of as a portrait. And unfortunately, as a portrait, there are a few issues. One is that the light is coming from behind the person, and so if you look at his ear, the ear is burned out completely. And then if you look at the red turban on the right-hand side of it, parts of it go magenta. And what's happening, I don't know if you guys can see it on your screen, but there's magenta in that half. And what happens there is, what's happening there is basically you're burning out yes, exactly. You're burning out one or two of your channels, but not all three. So that's why it's not white, but that's also why you kind of losing detail and why the color shifts the way it does. So that's hard to correct too, frankly. Unless you have like a raw image where you could recover that sort of one or two burned out channels. The same thing is sort of happening on the back of his shirt. You've got there's a lot of sort of scrunchy stuff going on there, which is problematic, and some of that could be from where the light's hitting. The other thing that's very tough, because his face is mostly in the shade, and the one thing about about photographing people in bright colors is, if you notice under his chin there is a red color cast, and fixing that red color cast is yeah, it goes up to his ear. Yeah, follow the chin along a line up to the ear. There's a lot of red, and actually kind of where his hair is, there's a lot of red. Fixing that color cast is a bear, I will tell you. It's so hard to kind of deal with that. So in terms of a portrait, I kind of felt there were a lot of problems with it, but there is one thing that I absolutely just fell in love with in terms of this photograph, and that's basically if you crop out the portrait and you look at the gray part, kind of in the kind of the 2/3 on the left side, 2/3 to the bottom. I love that. That is a beautiful sort of cityscape. I love it's basically a black and white, but then there are these hints of little red pop colors and browns. No, up at the top, further up. Yeah, like.
Yeah, I see this right there.
That's the best one. And then there's one kind of right on the other side of that pole. But I think that's a beautiful cityscape. And I don't know if you were aware, whoever photographed this, if you were aware of it or not. But one of my teachers once said, when somebody said, he was commenting about something that he really liked about an image, and the person said, well, I wasn't even paying attention to that. I didn't even know I took that. And the teacher said, yes, but it's your photograph, right? And he said, yeah, and you chose to crop it this way. Yeah, and he said, so own it. It's on some subconscious level, you must have seen and kind of noted that. And so that's one of the things that's difficult about photography in general. Not difficult, but a lot of what we do is when we're photographing, it's subconscious. So, I guess my thought is here is maybe start looking for things like what you see on the left, because I think that's absolutely gorgeous. The only thing you might do to make that work a little bit better is tone down the bar that's running down the middle so that it sort of matches tonality the rest of it. But I think it's a very, very interesting image by itself. I don't need to see this one for further consideration.
Right. Next one is Nectar.
This one has a beautiful color palette. I love sort of this kind of aqua background and these subtle pinks and greens. It has a very nice, fresh spring feel to it. You've caught the bee wonderfully. You've got his head and his eyes showing very nicely, his wing, his legs, his body. So that's a very nice element of this photograph. You have a second bee over here on the right that unfortunately is out of focus. And I was thinking, boy, it would be great if he was on the flower that was right in front, because then he would probably be absolutely in focus as well. And then you would have a nice kind of picture of the two bees that is just, you know, beautifully sharp all the way through, at least in that area. But because he's not in focus, I think you could probably crop out the focus, you know, crop out the third on the right and crop some off the bottom. And you still have all of the beautiful colors. You still have the repetition of the flowers. And you have this one bee that is just beautifully photographed. And I think that would work beautifully as the image in and of itself. You might have been hoping that that second bee would work out, but yeah, sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. So you have to sort of take what you get. So I think with a good crop, this has a very kind of beautiful spring-like feel to it. The background has some nice kind of slight texture, not texture, but molting to it that I think is beautiful. We can, I don't need to see this one for further consideration.
All righty, the next one is Morning Mist in the Mountains.
This has a very nice feel to it. Beautiful greens, and the fog is just gorgeous in the background. One thing I might suggest is you've kind of vignetted it pretty heavily. I don't know that you might want to lighten that just a tiny bit so that you don't block up your shadows in those areas. The other comment I would make is, and this is a matter of sort of taste, is at the very top, maybe inch or so, you see some white sky that's lighter than the fog. If you crop that out, then the fog becomes more, it kind of encloses the picture a little bit more so that you have a more of a feel. I think it emphasizes the sense of fogginess. And it also emphasizes this triangular part in the very center where the path leads through. And I think that is just what is a very beautiful element of this picture. So sort of cropping the top would give you that focus on that triangular middle piece quite nicely. The other thing that you might want to consider is on the right-hand side, you have this tree that sort of is like a parenthesis on the whole picture. And you also have a tree here on the left that echoes that. If you crop it sort of very similarly on the left, then you sort of keep if you do both of those crops, then your ratio is still the same. But then your trees are sort of acting as a parenthesis to hold in the image. And that might be something that might strengthen it. It also makes the path a little offset, which I think is also a plus in terms of adding a little bit of dynamic quality to the image. So very nicely done. I would say let's keep this one in for further consideration.
All righty, the next one, Low Tide at Dusk.
This one, the pastel palette on this is just gorgeous. Beautiful repetition of these lines in the sea. The yellow kind of stripes going through them are just, I think, fabulous. And then you have sort of a kind of a big stripe, two stripes at the bottom, or three big stripes at the bottom. And the one thing that I look at, there's also a little orange stripe at the very bottom. It's a very tiny one, line. That it's kind of nice in some ways because it echoes the golden lines in the kind of in the middle of the ocean, but it also feels so uniform that I don't know. Maybe I you know, you might want to try it with it out or with it in, because there's advantages to both. With it being in, it's a nice echo of what's going on in the other stripes. But on the other hand, my eye does go to it, and it looks very uniform, and I'm not sure that works as well with sort of the rest of the image. But I think that's, again, I don't know, I could go either way on that one. I have to look at them carefully, both ways. But otherwise, I think the shadings on this are just beautiful. It's a really gorgeous image. We'll keep it in for further consideration.
All righty. Next one is Knothole.
Very nice job in terms of capturing the texture and the detail on the trunk here. This image, when I looked at it, I don't know if you're familiar with focus stacking, but this might be kind of one of the problems. Is the very center of the image is sort of looking through to the grass or vegetation behind it. And of course, that's all out of focus because a camera basically can't keep all of that stuff in focus at the same time. But you could photograph it and focus stack it in Photoshop. And a lot of cameras these days actually focus stack for you so that you might be able to get it in camera. Although my experience is I prefer to focus stack in Photoshop and just make sure I take pictures of every, make sure every element in the picture, make sure I photographed a picture of every element that I want sharp. So I would end up doing 2 or 3 images of this one, but one specifically kind of making the vegetation sharp. But it's possible you like it kind of blurry. But in general, people, I don't know, I think blurriness is a very difficult thing to pull off well in a photograph. And particularly when it's in the center of the image, it makes it even harder. The one thing, if you like it blurry, the one thing I would suggest is maybe darkening it down so that it's not the brightest thing in the picture. That would be more realistic for one, but also it would sort of balance against the rest of the knothole, I think, a little bit better. But I do think you've captured some really nice lines in the tree itself, and I do think the tree itself is very nicely tack sharp all the way through and well exposed, and you've got a very nice light on it to capture this beautiful texture. So I don't need to add this one. I don't need to see this one any further.
All right. Next one is Kayaks.
This kind of is an intriguing image because I kind of feel like there's 2 things going on here. One is a picture of 5 green kayaks lined up and with very nice diagonal lines. The difficulty is that the shadowing, the bright light and the shadowing sort of detracts from that beautiful geometry. And so ideally, it would be better to photograph this in softer light so that you could get more focus on the lines and sort of the pattern that's created by these. It would allow you to kind of like here in the lower right corner, it's like too light. You could also sort of burn that in to maybe deal with it, but I think the best thing would be is to try to photograph it in better lighting. But I think overall the composition is good for that kind of image. In looking at it overall, though, what I really found interesting in terms of the detail is what's going on with these. I guess these are the ropes that are stringing it that are holding everything together. That's what's in the lower left quarter of the image. And I love sort of that abstract quality, particularly of the one at the very bottom. How the shadows kind of form these little kind of ribbony lines in contrast to the ropes themselves. I think that's absolutely fascinating. So you actually have kind of 2 pictures here that could work quite well. And if you can go back and photograph this again in different lighting, I would say go for it because you could get some really interesting stuff. Very unique, particularly with the ropes, I think. We can, I don't need to add this one for further consideration.
Okay, next one is Hotel Paradise View.
I love this frame within a frame within a frame concept. I think that works very well, particularly since the outside frame has such fascinating details, all these holes. And there's some writing at the very bottom, which is something the devil. And I would, if you can lighten up the lower left so that that's readable, I think that kind of just adds an element to the photograph. It may not be readable, it's hard to say. But I also like the fact that that inner dark frame also has textural detail. It looks like concrete, I think. There's a little white tag. I would suggest cloning that out. It doesn't add anything to the picture. It just sort of brings your eye to the metal part of the frame, which that is probably less interesting than the rest. And then the scene itself, I think, is I think you've captured the tree nicely. It's offset nicely. The one thing is there's a lot of purple fringing going on, particularly right around the horizon. You can defringe that in Photoshop or Lightroom, but another way to kind of probably manage it is to just darken the landscape part of this. It's a little bit on the bright side. So if you darken it, I think it kind of does several things. One, it looks more realistic. It helps deal with the fringing, but it also kind of allows you to focus a little bit more on the frame, which is a very lovely part of the image itself. And you could play around with say lightening the frames a little bit to see how you like it. There's a lot of ways you could go with that I think could work out. So quite a very nicely seen image. We'll keep it in for further consideration.
Alrighty, the next one is fishing at sunrise.
I think the colors on this are absolutely beautiful, and the silhouette in general is very nice. The one thing about the two men is the guy on the right, his pose is beautiful. He's kind of looking out over the sea, and you get a sense that he's contemplating the universe, perhaps. The second guy, unfortunately, I guess, is removing his hat during the picture, and that creates the silhouette line is not very easily understood, and unfortunately, that sort of detracts from the image. What I might suggest is if you could clone that out and sort of clean it. It looks like his hair is kind of going wild there in the front, kind of tone down his hair a little bit so that it looks like he's looking down and praying. I think then you have, this one guy contemplating and another guy praying, and it really adds tremendously to the mood. So that would be one way to kind of deal with that. There's a little bit of sort of extra fishing lines in there that you might want to clean up as well, just to have the silhouette around the guys be as clean as possible. I'd leave the two in the front, but maybe the ones that are between, yeah, like right in there, you might want to just clean them up. It's a nitpicky thing, but all of those little things add up when you're in a competition. There's another way that I think this image would work very well, and that's if you crop out the very top and kind of where the black in the very middle goes across, just crop there so that what you're seeing is the pilings and kind of the black deck, so to speak. The thing that I think that I liked about that is the clouds and the sun are right underneath there. So all the textural detail is, in the sky itself is underneath the pier. And you could crop that, and it becomes a very different picture because it's more of an abstract, but it's a very lovely abstract. And you've got all the colors of the sky. This yellow that's at the very top is more intensified between the floor and the ocean itself. So that's another way to go that you might want to look at that I think could create. You really have the opportunity to have two different images here. So we'll keep this one in for further consideration.
All righty. The next one is Fall Sparkle.
This is a kind of an interesting image. And the first thing that I noticed is this kind of leaf sticking up here. And at first blush, you might not like that. But as I looked at it, some of the elements I like about this is sort of these oblong rocks that are repeated across the middle of the picture. And then at the very bottom, there's also an oblong rock. But then if you look at the kind of in the lower right, there's sort of this triangular rock sticking up that echoes that leaf very nicely. And then there's a nail or maybe a leaf stem sticking up kind of in the lower top. Those three elements are a nice repetition of each other. And the way they're oriented is very nice too, because you look at them you go up and through a curve in the picture. So that's a kind of a repeating element that I think is quite nice in this image. And if you wanted to emphasize that, you could crop off maybe a quarter of the left-hand side, and then your eye would go up. That stem would lead you maybe to the corner, and then you would come down and circle around again. And so that cropping it a little differently would emphasize that kind of repetitious element in a very nice fashion. So something to look at. You may or may not agree, but I think it does emphasize those elements nicely, if that's what your intent is. Otherwise, I think the sparkly kind of way you've captured the water is very nice, and we'll keep it in for further consideration.
All righty, next one, Chevy Anchor.
I think it's a nicely captured image of I guess this is a catamaran. And I think the shadowing underneath it and the kind of the line of the sand is very nice as well. The color in general in this picture is very nice. I like that the background is not very cluttered. You have one other boat in the background, and then some in the very distance you have a line of them. So it's a nice kind of element in the image, and it's very clean in that respect. We'll keep it in for further consideration.
All righty. Next one is breath. Breathe, sorry.
Okay.
Mike, you've got the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here we
titles
go.
Out of order.
No, I don't. Okay. This is. We had, as far as that was yours. This would be Jim. Let me check something here. I got. Okay, this is Chevy Anchor.
Okay.
That is the title. Okay, got it.
Okay. One of the things that's really striking about this image is the color palette is just beautiful. You've managed to capture these saturated colors, but in a very muted fashion, and I think that's a real difficult thing to achieve. But it is a very beautifully captured color palette. As I was looking at this, the detail is wonderful. It's very nice and tack sharp all the way through. The more I looked at this, I kind of like that. The thing about looking at a piece for a long time is you start to look at more of the details. And I was thinking it feels a little off to me in certain respects. And the first thing I thought was maybe it's the crop. It's not centered. Not that it has to be, but then I realized what felt a little off to me is actually the shadowing. If you look here on the right-hand side, you have a bright area up in the purple, and then kind of the green right below the red. There's a green kind of curve that comes down to the steel piece, and on that side you have this sense, almost like it's an orange. You have a sense of shape and depth in the image. So that is a really beautiful, it's a very lush, beautiful feel. Yeah, that kind of, it's not kind of flat, it's sort of feels three-dimensional because of that shadowing. On the left-hand side, you don't have that shadowing as much, and therefore it feels a little flatter in aspect. So what you might think about trying is kind of in a similar area, just darkening that green and blue area down just a bit, so that you end up with that same sense of curvature and lushness. And it's hard to say if it would work or not. You have to do it to see it, but because If you darken that area too much, it might not work. But if you could kind of figure out how to have that same sense of curvature on the left-hand side as you do on the right, I think it would really add to the image quite a bit. But it's a gorgeous image. I love all the texturing and the colors in it. It's very hard to achieve coloring like this that's saturated but also on the muted side. So we'll keep it in for further consideration.
All righty. Now we have breath.
Yeah, okay. I think with these soft focus flowers, a lot of times what draws people in and what we aim for is sort of these beautiful lines and curves. And kind of on the far left here, you have this white line, greenish line. It's very faint. That's a beautiful curve going up. And I guess it ends in a little leaf-like. I think that's a very beautiful element of this image. I also like the little red, I don't know, detail poking out. It's almost in the middle of the picture, but a little bit up. I think those kind of soft curves kind of echo the first one that I pointed out. But there's less of that in the rest of the image. And I think the other problem is that you have some white that's blown out in kind of the very middle of the image and a little bit lower than center. You've lost detail there. So one of the ways that you might kind of address that is just, again, with a really tight crop maybe 2/3 into the image, crop out the right 1/3 so that you keep those little red lines, and then maybe crop out the bottom half. And then you're capturing some of the more beautiful, elegant curves in the image that aren't as prominent in the other areas that I just suggested cropping out. We can take this one out. I don't need to see it further.
All righty, the next one is bench.
One of the struggles that I have, and I think that's very difficult with blurred images, is a lot of times our eye wants to anchor on something that's in focus. It's very hard to do a completely blurred image well. I've seen a few people do it, but not very many. But there are elements that I really love about this. Kind of on the same level as the bench, you have these red vegetation on the very left and also on the very right of the bench. I think those are just beautiful in terms of the textures and the quality of that. It's a very wonderful part of the image. I also like sort of that texturing that's on the very bottom, but that's fairly uniform and it's fairly dominant. It's about half the picture. So I think you could crop maybe a fair amount of that out so that then, because your eye right now kind of focuses mostly on that bottom texture and less so on the top texture. So cropping out a fair amount of that. You can leave some in because it is very nice, but kind of balancing it a little bit more with the texture on the top would be an improvement. I love the color palette. It's a very nicely done. I presume this is an infrared that's been colorized or used a color filter, but it doesn't really matter how it's done. I think the color palette is quite nice on it. I don't need to see this one for further consideration.
Right, next one is Beach Dreams.
This one just has such a beautiful mood to it. It's really fabulous. The color palette is gorgeous, and a lot of times, we go for the super saturated color palette in photography. That's sort of the National Geographic look. But these subtle kind of muted colors, I think, can just be absolutely stunning. And I love sort of the curves that are in sort of that water area, the sort of wavy lines, I should say. Though, kind of in looking at the sky, there's a couple of comments. One is if you go to the very upper left, you're starting to see blue sky, and it is a purer color than the rest of the image, and therefore it doesn't quite match the rest of the image. It's kind of like the soft image landscape I was talking about earlier. So there's two ways you could do that. One is that you could just try to clone that, copy other parts of the sky and replace that blue area. But the other option is to come down right below it and crop off some of the top of the sky. And I think you can do that quite nicely. I mean, your composition is such that you've got the 2/3, 1/3 on the horizon. If you crop, a quarter of the top off, then you're no longer kind of meeting that design recommendation. But to be honest, those are the kinds of rules that are made to be broken sometimes. And I think in this case, as long as your horizon isn't dead center, this would work. You could make the sky just, you could make the really beautiful part is the ocean waves here, the ocean. The sky less so. So you could just crop most of the sky out and have the focus be on the waves, or you could crop just a little bit of the sky out and still have a lot of sky. And there's sort of pluses and minuses to both of those. The sky gives it a sense of expansiveness and brightness that is kind of nice. So leaving more in has a different feel than cropping most of it out. I think the white balances the darker beach and kind of makes it a more upbeat image. So it's kind of hard to say what would work the best. And again, I think that's a matter of personal preference, but I think it's overall a very beautiful image, and we'll keep it in for further consideration.
All right, next one, Bay of Dreams.
I love the soft kind of, we call these drive-by shooting. It has a nice dreamy quality to it. It looks like you were in a moving vehicle perhaps, or moving your camera. But it's a nice look. I like it. Again, I'm looking at the very center where there's a little kind of pond or inlet that's kind of a long, narrow shape. And if you look at the very top, if you crop out, again, your whitest part is way up here at the very top, and your eye goes to white, which we don't really want it to do. We don't want it to go out of the frame. So if you cropped out maybe the top 1/8 of the image.
Yeah.
Now there's not all of the white, because there's one kind of white bright spot at the kind of the lowest bright white spot. The nice thing about that is the shape of that echoes the shape of that inlet in the middle of the picture. And so if you cropped out the white that's above that, but left that in, then you have a nice repetition of that white with the white inlet. And then there's a hint of that white inlet further on the left-hand side. And so I think that compositionally works in terms of nice repetition. And I do like the fact that echoes that kind of top white area echoes the mid part quite nicely. So we'll keep this in for further consideration.
All right, and the last one is Amongst the Clouds.
This one is, I think the palette on this is obviously unrealistic, but I think it's very beautiful. I think it has a dreamy, ethereal quality that works very well. The one thing that kind of puzzled me, and maybe it's not a puzzle, but is the choice of subject in the sense that it's a vehicle. This almost looks like an advertising picture. And I guess if that's what it's for, then it's probably very appropriate. But I think this sort of ethereal mood of the rest of the image, if it's a personal image, I think a different subject would work better. You know, a horse, an animal, a couple of people, or a person kind of keeps that romantic feeling of the rest of the image. Whereas, like I said, with the truck, it feels like it's an advertising image, and it takes away from the emotional quality that you would have if you had a different subject in there. The other thing I kind of noticed is you have very nice, this mirroring is quite nice. If you follow the kind of the line on the right-hand side where the mountains are, there's this one last little lighter mountain that ends in kind of a sharp point. If you keep going, following the horizon out to the left side, you sort of lose your sense of horizon there, kind of on the other side of the truck, on the left-hand side of the truck. You've kind of lost your sense of the separation, where the horizon line is. So what you might want to try is, if you take that little thin purple line where that last mountain ends and just sort of extend it the rest of the way to create a sense of horizon, that might kind of improve the quality of that area to the left of the truck, where you're sort of losing that sense of where the horizon is. So that's the only little quibble I would make with sort of the execution of this. I think it's a beautiful image, well
Into
done,
the safe zone,
we'll
and
keep it
that's
in for
my
further
photograph.
consideration.
That's it, folks. And thanks, Barbara.
I took this. The alleyway is real. The whole thing's real. That was taken in Evansville, Indiana. That's pretty much what it looked like. I couldn't. It looked like a movie set. So I just thought, well, what can I do with that? So I just was thinking about, just something different, a little bit interesting, subtle. So I took a picture of myself acting like I was running into my bathroom door, and I cloned myself out. And then I took a photograph of that hat I had, and I photographed that and put that in there. So, I think what I was shooting for was shadowing. I wanted the shadows to have a pattern. You could see how you get a triangle here, it all connects. And so that's what I was kind of looking for. But I just wanted people to imagine what you're running away from, or what you're trying to do, or I wanted to keep it simple. But anyway, this was taken, I took a picture of myself in my own place, running out of my bathroom, running into my bathroom. So that's how I did it. So anyway, and then the next one is going to be for color. That's Miss Michelle Simmons. Go ahead, Michelle. You get third place. You're muted, I think. I can't hear you. You're muted, Michelle. We can't hear you.
Unmuted.
Okay, now I hear you.
Okay. First of all, Barbara, your critiques were awesome and very helpful. I love how you said how to, not just what was wrong with it, but how to improve it. That was very helpful. This is the ceiling at Rosewall City Hall. I went over to have 2 photos in an exhibit there and saw this. I just looked up and saw this and thought it was awesome. So I put my phone on the ground and centered it and shot it, and there it is.
This is a cell phone image?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's really came out very well.
Thank you.
Can you imagine that as a MC Escher kind of a picture?
Yeah, I could see that, but Escher would add a lot more stuff in it. But yeah, you definitely see the tones. You're right.
Because people walking in and out and around, upside down.
Oh yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The tones are certainly there. Next one. This got second place, and that goes to, I believe, Rue Britton. Did I say that? Yeah.
Well, I was out in here in Chicago a couple weeks ago taking shots for our color competition, and I hadn't been out shooting in Chicago actually probably since I got back here much. And it was a beautiful day. There was so much to shoot. There was so much activity on the river, everywhere, the lake. I mean, it was really a fabulous day. And anyway, I came back with this shot in my camera, which I really liked. Like you said, the Hitchcock-esque kind of look to it. So, it's grab shots. They're stuff's in motion, you don't necessarily have the right speed and everything on your camera when you when these things happen. So I did like it though.
You know,
That's
for an
right.
image like this, though, you don't need to be tack sharp, right? It's the mood that really makes it.
Right. Yeah.
So the birds behaved themselves when you took the picture?
Yeah. Well, I didn't get dive bombed. That's one good thing.
And first place for mono goes to Mr. Michael Burris.
Wonderful.
All right.
Very nice.
Tell us about Michael. This is the first ribbon you got in our club, I believe, maybe. So awesome, awesome, awesome.
Well, I'm proud to be here. I'm very happy to be here. I see wonderful things, but this was taken in Passau, Germany. And really not too much to tell other than I saw him heading into the light and I wanted to make it look like a dreary kind of a night with raindrops and so forth, which you see on the right side. And I needed a light source, so I added a little chandelier on the left.
Mhm.
And he needed to have an umbrella in his hand, so I added an umbrella.
Okay.
Wow, that's good photoshopping then. Now, was it raining or did you add the rain? I'm just curious.
I added the rain.
Okay.
Yeah, and the two lights and the arches on the middle part. Actually, all I had to do was light those up, and that was there, and I was amazed.
Just an aside, Passo has the largest organ in Europe. The organ there is unbelievable. So I thought I'd tell you folks that. You should get a chance to go there. Huge organ. It's amazing. Anyway.
Beautiful image. Congratulations, Mike.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just an absolutely beautiful image. I love it.
Okay, now color, we go to honorable mention, and this is going to be Sunset on the Bay by Mr. Steve Director. I don't know if he's here, but.
I don't think he's on.
All right. Anyway, most of the members, if they saw this, I'd predict Steve took it because he takes a lot of this kind of stuff.
Mm.
Then the next one is by Mark McElhaney. It's called, of course, Beach Dreams. And Mark, I know, is not here. He told me he was going to be away. Mark said, I hope he participated in the program that, Barbara, that you gave about abstract. He says, I'm going to try because she inspired me to try abstract. So here I go. So let me know what she thinks of it. Well, she likes it. So there you go. So Mark,
first abstracts, it's pretty amazing.
yeah, this is something he normally doesn't take. He's a street photographer guy, but he was inspired by you. So I want you to know that.
Well, good. Well, tell him I'm very impressed with his, with where he's going with it.
And then now we get to L's second, and this is, of course, Mr. Jim Harrison.
Yeah, this it's an old Chevy taken at Simpson Farm, which Al McLeod introduced us to. And yeah, I was just taken by all the cool, subtle colors. It was late in the day, so the sun wasn't down, but it was behind the trees. So the chrome is really reflecting the blue sky up above. And I thought the head ornament and then the Chevy logo looked like an anchor. That's the title, Chevy Anchor. So appreciate it.
It's a wonderful palette that you see on the vehicle. So it's really beautiful, very, very appealing. And finally, we get to El Firsto. This goes, it's called Low Tide at Dusk, and that's going to be Steve Director, but he's not here. He will be happy. You know, he's been getting tons of honorable mentions, but no first. But this is the second first in the last like three times. So he's doing great all of a sudden at the end of the year. So that's great to see. Anyway, that's all, folks. If there's any questions, you can ask Barbara if you want before we head out.
Yeah, we were discussing the high quality of the judging done tonight by Barbara when we were out in the chat room. And I thought this is the best commentary we've ever had from any judge since I've been in the club.
Wow, thank you.
I learned a lot from your comments on my images and from everyone else's. Just thank you so much for your effort and really looking hard at the details and nitpicking. Thank you so much.
I agreed. I said it was the most insightful judging we've had in a long time.
Well, we've had a lot of good judges this year, and Barbara is certainly way up there. So, Barbara, we appreciate you very much. Your insight and being critical in a positive, growing way. It's a good way to put it.
Yes.
That's the way to do it. So I really appreciate it. Anyway, that's all, folks. Thanks for coming. Great images. Congratulations to all the ribbon winners and all those who entered. It makes no difference, really. Winning or lose, you're all a part of it, and we all appreciate you entering. It's about learning and growing together. Thank you so much. Make sure we make